bore you out, but we toured an awful lot. So let me introduce Eric very quickly, and Elizabeth as well, and I love this. This is right off their website. He is a zoning whisperer. He specializes in balancing and blending the often competing needs of urban design, architecture, and development in a potent cocktail. I heard there would be cocktails. For better places, and we want Tipton to be a better place. He specializes in breaking down and demystifying the regulations to find ways to make great projects possible when helping others navigate the redevelopment maze. And for those of us that work in this, it is a maze sometimes. His partner, Elizabeth Ward-Williams, serves as Director of Urban Design at Kronberg Urbanists and Architects. She is a native of Atlanta. She's trained as an architect and a city planner with master's degrees from Georgia Tech in both fields. She's very smart. And so in summation, why did we select them? So from their website, it says they are partners for lasting places. Well, Tipton's been around since 1872, and we hope it continues to last. It says they're partners for vibrant places. Consider the alternative. Partners for inclusive places. And if you saw the invitation list to this meeting today, it included a whole lot of folks. As our Mayor Julie has often said, we are not North Tifton, we are not South Tifton. We're not East Tifton, we're not West Tifton. We are one Tifton. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Eric and Elizabeth.
So just to level set expectations, we're going to be talking a lot tonight about how we think about places, make them better. We're not going to be sharing any specific site plans or what you should do with the site next to Nine Oaks. This is much more about a process of thinking about healthy cities. So there's not going to be a big reveal of, hey, you should do X or Y there yet. This is much more about getting ready to think about what could happen later. So just a brief introduction. Bruce did a great job, so I'll go through these briefly. This is us. As Bruce said, we do care about making flourishing neighborhoods. And we play in a lot of sandboxes. We play with Elizabeth leads urban design. We focus a lot on Main Street redevelopment. We call it housing choice. More housing options than we typically see in America of the detached single-family home or the big apartment building. We also do urban development, provide development guidance to clients. We're often working with nonprofits, development authorities, and because we build our stuff, we can give very specific approaches to how do we make it better, how do you execute, how do you actually get things done. But all of this really comes down to fixing zoning and policy if we want the right kinds of things to happen for our cities. And so it's when you put all those pieces together that you have possibilities. And one other thing, just to level set, we do a lot of work for nonprofits. Attainable housing is a mission. We are always trying to look to do this with the least amount of subsidy possible, ideally with no subsidy. But when we play with attainable housing in America today, there often is some kind of subsidy. But we're really trying to avoid low-income housing tax credits. We're trying to look at what kinds of things can be done at the local level, not requiring federal obligations and all the compliance that comes with that. So we look at these place-based strategies. This is a place I self-developed, another one developed for attainable housing. Again, as we said, inclusive, lasting, vibrant, and attainable places. These are the core of what we see as flourishing neighborhoods. You have to have these things. We see places across America that are vibrant and lasting. They're rarely inclusive. Right? How do you provide all three? That's what we're working on every day. And part of this is we think about all the different components of a development that requires resources, time or money. And as architects and urban designers, we really want to see as much go into the lower part into design as possible. But infrastructure, finance, civic processes can really suck the resources out of projects. That's why we don't get the kinds of projects we would like to see and be proud of in our communities. All right. Everywhere in America, we see these three competing desires that everybody wants. They want stable services, low taxes, and low density. And this is a fundamental challenge because in just overlaps, this is what it takes to do that. Because there is not, the middle does not exist. You cannot have all three of those. If you want a functioning town to pay for itself, and you want the services that it provides, that costs resources, that costs money. How you generate that income matters, and we'll talk about that a lot. A lot of this is going to be math and financial based we're doing. And so when we look at these areas on this Venn diagram, we're framing things in the conversation of abundance versus scarcity, right? And when we say abundance more for more, That is that more density option that we're talking about with better services and keeping the taxes from spiking. Everything else in gray is some form of scarcity of less for less, right? How do we get to that green? That is a fundamental question. We always like to ask people, why do we think attainable communities are so hard to provide? And fundamentally, our development policies are core to those outcomes. The vast majority of these are determined at the local level. Does anybody here not believe the U.S. is facing a housing crisis? Tifton in particular. I don't know a city in America that doesn't have some form of housing crisis today. Why is it so hard? Here's the 5 L's of any development deal. Land, labor, lumber, laws, and loans. And you can't get away from it. These are all input costs that determine output costs for what you're doing. And so when we talk to folks from a local standpoint, we used to say that only laws were the local ones controllable locally, but more and more we're cities putting land in the deal. They have municipal owned land or otherwise. That land can be put in at a zero or low cost to reduce the cost of housing. But what we see is, time and again for development deals, your land cost is often 10 to 20% of the total deal. Free land always helps, but it doesn't get you there, right? It's never enough to get you to the outcomes you often want. Our laws, study after study, show add 25 to 40% of the overall cost of the units. That's a huge cost, right? How you look at what your local laws require has a disproportionate outcome, and so that's where we spend a lot of our time. So it's really that question of how does zoning impact affordability? But before we really dig into that, there's some context. And Elizabeth's going to do this, and I'll cover this. And Jessica's freaking out, so I said we're just about 200 slides, so they'll go fast. She's going to do a little bit, and I'll come back.
Yeah, we'll keep it quick. So before we dig into a project, we always like to do our homework and understand the place where we're working. And so we do a lot of existing data review and try and understand the context. We spend time looking at y'all's comprehensive plan and also your 2025 housing needs assessment. And there are a lot of housing goals, a lot of talk about housing in both of those documents. And key takeaways for us, there's a lack of affordable housing specifically. There's also a lack of mid-range housing, so housing between $150,000 and $200,000. And you all have a very unique ratio of rental to home ownership in that it is a high rental market, much higher than we see in other places. And many residents who live in Tifton have identified workforce housing, affordable, attainable housing as a top priority. So about 6,600 households within Tifton, living in about 7,400 units. The household AMI, 44,320, that's for a family. Is that a family of four, Eric? Family of four. And that is on the lower end of what we typically see. Employment rate about 52%. Very interestingly, less than half, or almost half of people living in Tifton only own one car. 13% don't own a car. So very light car ownership actually, which makes projects a lot more interesting to design because you're not needing to figure out how to store 2 cars for every single housing unit. Tifton's also unique in that 90% of your households are non-traditional, meaning they are not made up of a traditional nuclear family. 22% are couples without kids, 17% are single-parent households. Over half are one-person households, one person living alone. The average household size is 2.37 people. And the primary renter group is, ages between 25 and 34. There's also an aging population. So when we talk about how we design places, aging in place is a very important thing. How are people going to be able to get around without a car? Of those households, so 64% of households are between 1 and 2 people, or 1 or 2 person households. However, only 743 of your housing units are studios or 1-bed units. So there's a big mismatch between the housing that you all need and the housing that you all have. Just to explain area median income, which is the term that is used to define what is affordable housing, this is a HUD metric. 100% of AMI is the midpoint of regional income. So that just means that half of people in the community make more than that, and half of them make less. And so again, Tifton's is 44,000, just over 44,000. You are considered cost burdened if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing. Tifton has, within renter households, as you would probably expect, the lower end of the spectrum, so people earning $50,000 or less are the most cost burdened. This data is from 2018, but what's surprising is over the last 5-6 years, that percentage of cost burdened households within renters has gone up quite a bit, and it is moving past that 50,000 mark. So more and more households that are earning more are becoming cost burdened. 41% of renters in Tifton County are cost burdened. That's county data. Yeah, so we have a mix of city and county data depending on the source. So I'm trying to keep it straight. But 21% of Tifton County homeowners are considered cost burdened. 62% of units in Tifton are rentals. And so compare that to Georgia, the state, and also the US, which are about the same. It's basically the inverse. So typically we see 65% of homes as ownership. So focusing on home ownership would be a great thing for you all, for a variety of reasons. Your housing stock is also aging. So most of your housing units were built 1980 or earlier, okay? So housing is gonna need more and more work, right? For a family making 100% of AMI, so remember $44,000, the maximum sale price of a home should be no more than $140,000 for a family to not be cost burdened. The average sale price today in Tifton for a home is about $170,000. So what makes housing expensive? There's a lot of things that go into building a home, and this is for new construction here. So typical project cost components include the vertical components, that's sticks and bricks, just the materials to build the building. Horizontal components, that's anything on the site, infrastructure, parking, landscape. Soft costs are fees, so things like paying a designer or a survey or realtors. And then the land has a cost as well. So if you break that down, a typical 3-bedroom home at 1,600 per square feet, average building cost of $165 a square foot, you're looking at $265,000 just to build the house, right? Then you factor in all those other costs, $30,000 for your horizontal, $45,000 for soft costs, that's including realtor fees, $30,000 for the land, that was just us looking around on Zillow and seeing what a lot costs, and then $30,000 for profit, which is not a huge profit margin. You're looking at $400,000 to build a new home. $400,000. That's 300% of your AMI. Right? So how can we do things differently? We've got to think about how we build smaller. If most of the households are one-person households, do we need to be designing and building 1,600 square foot 3-bedroom homes? These are a couple of homes that we have designed and built previously, and we just ran the same math on it. So holding everything constant, same land cost, same profit margins. A 1-bed, 1-bath house that's 434 square feet sell for $182,000. And a 2-bed, 1.5 bath house could sell for about $275,000. That's still 200% of AMI. Still not super affordable. And then we took a quick look on Zillow just to see, okay, what are existing homes selling for? And you can get a 3 or 4 bedroom home for between $150,000 to $400,000 today. So it's going to be hard for larger new construction homes to compete with existing housing stock when you can get a home that exists for about half the cost. You guys are lucky in that you have a really large urban redevelopment area and a great urban redevelopment agency to work with. Your zoning is, we work in all sorts of places and we see all kinds of zoning. Y'all, it's not the worst. But the majority of zoning in the areas around your downtown, which are the areas we would recommend focusing on where people can walk to places, walk to shopping and jobs, the majority of those areas are zoned residential, which is good, but the lot sizes and the setback requirements are very large. So for some of these districts, you're looking at 14,000 square foot minimum lot sizes. Okay, so when we think of land cost is a big driver in the cost of the overall home. And so if we can bring that cost down in any way, we're trying to do that, and large setbacks and large minimum lot sizes are something that contributes and something that is within your control. We also did a quick scan just to see how many lots within downtown allow two-family by right. So more than one house per lot. Actually, quite a few. So there's things to work with. It's just overcoming some of those obstacles like those minimum lot sizes. And if you're a duplex, your lot size goes up even more. There's extra size lots for if you're a duplex, so you kind of get penalized. So a little bit of Housing Choice 101. So 80% of households in the US are not traditional nuclear families. Y'all are at 90%. But typically what we see is 72% of American housing units cater to traditional nuclear families. So they are those larger size, larger lot, single family homes. So there's a big mismatch just across the spectrum in supply and demand. And what we're also seeing is big shifts in demographics. So in 1950, the number of people per household was close to 4. Today, 2017, it was 2.5, and we're trending down. It's more closer to 2 today. The average size of a new single-family home in 1950 was less than 1,000 square feet, and today it's over 2,500 square feet. So we went from less than 300 square feet of living space per person to over 1,000. So our homes have gotten basically 3.5 times bigger. That's cost. Because household sizes are decreasing, we also need more houses for the exact same number of people. So in 1950, at 3.8 people per household, if you had 8 people, they were living in 2 homes, right? And they were living in smaller homes. By 2017, those same 8 people, because household sizes have changed, you need 3 houses to house the exact same number of people, and those houses have gotten bigger. 2030, the way things are trending, we're going to be at 2 people per household by 2030. That means you need 4 houses for the same exact number of people. So twice as many homes for the exact same number of people. What we currently mandate is larger homes on larger lots. So it's legal to build large homes everywhere, but we need to be thinking about how to have more of a variety. So allow larger and smaller homes to accommodate the different household sizes that you guys actually have. And it's also important to focus on where the housing is. So a majority of adults across all age groups say they would prefer to live in a walkable neighborhood, but the data shows that very few people actually do live in a walkable neighborhood. And it's not because they're just not living where they want to live, it's because there's not enough housing available within walkable neighborhoods. So we need to increase housing supply where it's actually walkable so people can live where they want to. Again, national data, but this is a trend that's playing out in every city we work in. Home prices, whether rental or for sale, are rising at a rate way faster than incomes can keep up with. If you make $15 an hour, which is double Georgia's minimum wage, that means you make about $30,000 a year. If you do not want to be cost burdened, which is 30% of that income, you shouldn't spend more than $800 a month on housing. In addition, if you spend over 20% of your income on transportation, you're considered cost burdened. So if you're making $30,000 a year, if you spend more than $500 a month on transportation costs, so car payments, etc., then you're considered cost burdened. And AAA estimates that cost ownership of a vehicle is closer to $1,000 a month. So you need to make over $50,000 a year to not be cost burdened to own 1 car. Double if you own 2 cars. All right, I'm gonna let you take it. Sorry.
We got like 150 more slides. All right, let's go. All right, so we're going to talk about the cost of all this stuff. And usually it's a conversation between single-family only zoning and more housing choices. And to give you an example, these are 15,000 square foot lots, so very in keeping with your minimum lot size, all drawn to scale. Typical house prices for existing, nicer, larger houses on existing lots. What we like to talk about is single-family only zoning is a policy of legally mandated scarcity. That is the intent, that is the purpose of this. What we see time and again is maybe you're lucky to have one of those rare traditional nuclear families living in a house, more often than not you have an aging senior that is really overhoused, right? One person that is in a 3, 4, 5 bedroom home, they would love to downsize, they don't want to leave the neighborhood, there are rarely choices within their same community for them to downsize into. And you have all these other people that like to be in that same community without any housing choices because Grandpa Bob doesn't have a place to go except until he gets old enough that he has to be forced into a home. So again, it also requires a lot of infrastructure beyond the social costs. So when we talk about infrastructure, we're being really straightforward. Sidewalks, curbs, trees, utilities, traffic lights, street lights, you got it, water, sewer, storm, paving, all of these things are provided by the city or the power company in some fashion. They all cost money to do. It's not just providing those. These things wear out over time. They have to get replaced over time. Most cities don't have budgets for that because they're trying to deal with services, right? The police, fire, schools, and trash. These are the things that take up most of the fees that you generate from property taxes and sales taxes. Most cities don't have a capital reserve to fix all the streets, all the curbs and gutters, because they're not getting enough revenue from property taxes to cover it. It's not a system that's functional or viable, right? Limited inputs cannot handle the long-term cost of replacement of all of this stuff. So it is a municipal financial disaster, and it is a scarcity model. This is why we don't have nice things. The question is, what can we do about this, right? If you change minimum lot sizes, you change granny flats, other kinds of policies, you can take that same land and provide a lot more choices for everybody to have a place. Now may seem like a more radical pivot from A to B, but there are a range of choices that you can do for this. The other thing we like to talk about, and this is from Dallas, Texas, so it's like, again, different scales, different sizes, but they did a study in Dallas Metro, and said housing that is within walking distance to goods and services, things like pizza, coffee, beer, ice cream, donuts, 70 to 100% more property value. That is something people are willing to pay for. Now, on one side of our mouth, we're talking attainability. On the other side of our mouth, we're talking desirability. Like, how do you provide both of these things, right? You may not be able to do all of this in the same project, but people like to live near stuff they can walk to. And the inside joke is that's called the Homer Simpson Plaza because it has all its favorite things. But again, when you look at going from 2.9 units per acre to almost 19 units per acre, the property taxes, the revenues are significantly more to cover city services and long-term capital, right? This is how cities stay vibrant and have money to pay for things for their citizens, right? It's a model of financial abundance, financial sustainability. We always like to challenge people, what would you do if your city had extra revenues? What would you want to invest it in, right? Things like bike lanes, street trees, things to make your downtown even more vibrant, things that would generate even more revenue, make Tifton even a better city that people would like to live near and take advantage of, right? How do you make this a positive feedback loop? Again, our policies are controlled locally. You can choose how you want to approach this, how you want to allow or not allow housing near your downtowns. Again, we are just repeating the efforts of Strong Towns. They're a phenomenal organization. They've been talking about this stuff for about 15 years. Urban 3 also does amazing graphing and mapping. These are great organizations that do this every day. We just borrow their methodology and their approaches. But what we also like to talk about when we talk about things for cities, you talk about commercial and outcomes. Everything you're seeing up here is the standard parking requirement for most cities in terms of amount of square footage per space for office, retail, restaurant, bar. These are one-story buildings. The property values of commercial come from the building, not the parking lot. We're legally mandating that our best case outcome is that half the lot is unusable to store cars, right? You're not going to get revenues out of that. Like, how do you make a great place? When you think about the most financially productive parts of Tifton, it's going to be your downtown, right? Small buildings, no wasted land per site, 3 stories generating revenue. This is what happens in a suburban model. How do you think past that? When you talk about, well, we've got to require parking, this is the outcome you're guaranteeing financially for your city. Now, people need to use cars. Does the government need to tell every property owner how many cars they should store? That's what we do now. Is that appropriate? Is it the best way to approach our cities to make them better? This is also one more quick Urban 3 example of how this works. They got to go deep in Lafayette, Louisiana in 2016, 2017, looked at all the GIS, all the city records, and they found out through analysis in 1949, Lafayette had about 33,000 people, and they had about 5 feet of pipe in the ground per person. And they had about 2.4 fire hydrants per 1,000 people. Like, that's a good metric for how much infrastructure the city was obligated to maintain. By 2015, they had boomed to 121,000 people, a 3.5 times increase in population, but their development patterns required a 10x amount of increase in pipe, 50 feet per person instead of 5, and a 21.5 almost percent increase, 21.4x times amount of fire hydrants. That's just all the amount of infrastructure the city has to pay for, right? 3.5 times increase in population, all those infrastructure obligations that have to get funded somehow. They're not getting 21.4 or 21 times the amount of property taxes out of those people, right? It's a losing game. And so we always talk about how to provide these more attainable, more walkable, as car-dependent choices without a big pot of subsidy in a way that can be financially viable for your city, right? There's this whole spectrum of housing choices. It's called missing middle housing. It's the thing du jour in planning, but it's about thinking through all these older types of inner cities that we used to have, right? And they're really hard to deliver because we make it illegal in those places. And so from a development standpoint, most builders and developers understand single family. That's really straightforward. The returns aren't great. Sometimes you can't build houses people can attain. People that specialize in large multifamily, there's enough money in that to pay for a bunch of consultants to sort it all out. Anything in between is just too hard and not enough return. What we try to do every day is help make this infill stuff more doable, more complete. And so we talk about that in a way of this level setting. We need better kinds of housing, more variety in types and sizes. We need smaller lot sizes and a variety of those. More mobility options. We're not saying transit, we're saying bike and walk along with cars. We also talk about parking on street as a mobility strategy, so you don't waste all your private property for vehicles. And we want to support a variety of people. So more examples of different kinds of scenarios where you reduce minimum lot size, you can build more housing types, two-family, can they be sold separately, backyard cottages, all these range of things that give you outcomes that involve smaller units. Parking light, typically one space per unit off street, but how do we leverage that extra parking space on street? In walkable mobility-rich areas, right? That means a lot of different things to a lot of people, but if you can walk 2 or 3 to 4 blocks to Main Street, to downtown, that's pretty awesome. And can support existing character of communities and enhance them. And so it looks like places we know and love. These are from Rome, Georgia, that backyard cottage, that duplex that's been there 100 years, or quadplex, tiny apartment buildings. These things in these older neighborhoods are often just there you don't even notice. When you're kids that are raised by an architect and an urbanist, they've been trained to go spot duplexes just by looking at electric meters. They're scarred for life. Neither want to be an architect. But this is an example in Chattanooga. These are 3 houses on the street. Oh wait, there's 20 units of housing in here, right? These were renovated. They fit in. These are small format apartments in a housing stock size, right? This is some stuff, just quick examples. We'll show you a few more things later of small format housing, a duplex, of attached accessory cottages, all kinds of things that can really add to the quality of a place. We've got a range of catalog choices I'll talk more about at the end. Elizabeth had a good idea to put that in. But we want to talk about how these increased housing choices in the right places help increase tax revenue and increase your attainable housing options. It's either solve it all or none of it works. And how this plays out, this is a real project we did some analysis for. This is in English Avenue, we're really transitioning. 5 years ago, they were a struggling neighborhood in Atlanta. They had a standard lot. This is a small local land trust. And we said, well, run the numbers. If we just build a single 2-bedroom house, what can happen? And it costs, come in about $400,000 at 145% of AMI for the city of Atlanta, not for the neighborhood, but the city. That's just the cost to do things. If you put an accessory cottage on the back, that's great, except that the down payment ballooned through the roof. Total project costs went up, but the owner got some rental income. And it was pretty affordable for the renter, but you had to show up with $100,000 in down payment with down payment assistance. That doesn't work. So we said, okay, well, what happens if we split the lot in half and we can do 2 homes and 2 accessory units or ADUs? That got pretty okay for the first homeowner because they had a rental income and not that big a house and half the lot size. Their down payment was still $66,000, which is still really expensive. Great for the renters, still really hard. Ultimately, we said, if we just let these be 4 houses for sale, promote home ownership all the way across the board, the cost went down to $309,000 for that same 2-bedroom on a small lot, and we have 3 1-bedroom cottages for sale. They're all at 85% of AMI. This is at $188,000, kind of the number from the previous slide. You start putting in free land, you start doing other things to reduce infrastructure costs, you can make this work. It's really just a math problem, right? At the end of the day, this is math, this is lot size, this is house size. You can't escape the math. And again, I think that's out of there. Yeah, the difference 1 unit for $350,000 on that versus $273,000. Can you really do this stuff? I mean, honestly, we were working with a nonprofit. They had a cleared lot that was in commercial in Atlanta neighborhood. We built 3 one-bedroom cottages for them, 600 square feet apiece. They sold for $199,000 to people qualifying 8% of AMI, right? A list out the door. All of them single professional females aged between 28 to 34. That is the buyer pool. I don't know why guys don't have their act together, but that's what it is. But these were on 30 by 30 lots, right? And what does that look like? On the right side are standard minimum lot sizes for Atlanta. On the lower left are Atlanta's historic minimum lot sizes from 1929. That little KUA with the arrow, that is the lot size of what I just showed you on the screen at 30 by 30. Texas passed a state law reducing minimum lot sizes for all cities, but really, I think they did 3,000. Houston's at 1,400 square feet, mandated for most of the city for minimum lot size. They dramatically pulled minimum lot size down. Houston's continuing to see some of the best housing attainability in the country because they have some of the most supportive zoning laws around that, or lack thereof. And so when we talk about mobility-rich places, we're really talking about supporting your downtown or your neighborhood center. It's that 5 to 10 minute walk around there. Quality of walk matters. But again, if you don't have to get in your car, and the walk is okay, that's a great walk. The moment you get in your car, whether you drive a quarter mile or 4 or 5 miles, it doesn't matter. You've already gotten in your car. It's convenient to park and getting out of your car. Let's get housing near downtown so it's convenient to walk that 2 to 4 blocks, support local businesses down there. And when we talk about this stuff, to understand where should this kind of walkability naturally occur, where does it happen, we have a cheat code for folks not in the urbanism world. We call it your Sanborn scan. And we say, think about your favorite part of town. Odds are it's probably built before 1929. That was the great crash, October 28th, Black Monday. Before 29, we built our cities car light, without zoning and without subsidy, which meant they were mobility flexible, use flexible, and cost conscious. That's just how America built their cities. That's why our older neighborhoods are more compact and more dense, because that's what you had to do to make urbanism functional without the current model. And so not only are they walkable mixed-use places, they paid for themselves. And so this is the Sanborn cheat sheet. These are your fire insurance maps. I think this is from like 24 or 25. This is what the fire insurance people said this is where Tifton was at that time. This is your core area around downtown. It's not that it can only be here, but it's the smaller blocks, walkable proximity, that are your highest chances for success of getting great infill. Now, again, attainability, desirability, how you balance those two, that is always a challenge, but this is your best chance for quality new construction to support that. And what I'd like to talk about, deviating a little bit, is of a good colleague. She did an amazing conversion of an old 4-story building in Bay City, Michigan, not a thriving city. She did it as condos, and a bunch of aging boomers moved into the condos. They wanted to walk to dinner. They wanted the downtown amenity, no yard, lock and leave, all those kinds of things we talk about. What really mattered was not their desirability to live downtown, it's that they moved out of a bunch of 3, 4, and 5 bedroom homes that put those homes back in the community for families, and they were much more attainable because they're 40, 50, 80-year-old homes. It's that cycling of people in and out that help make the community prosper and have the choices. Again, these are the places that pay for themselves. They pay for themselves then, they'll pay for themselves now. And again, so what we like to talk about is when you think about an abundance model, it's going to have a grid of streets, it's going to be walkable, it's mobility rich, use flexible, revenue positive. We, in this part of town over here, this is a scarcity model. You have a major corridor, you have a lot of infrastructure, a lot of roads, and not that much stuff happening to pay for all the stuff that's been built. So it's car dependent, use restrictive, and it's going to be revenue negative. We'll have to point out that every person you add to a downtown supports local businesses and adds vibrancy. Every person added to the scarcity model on the right consumes more scarce resources, it's more traffic and more road use, and you're worried about school capacity and everything else, you'd rather have less people, you don't realize it's not going to help you pay for the things you need. So, to Elizabeth's great advice, I want to throw what can this stuff look like, what is it all abstract? We also teach for a national nonprofit with a mission of how can we help small and mid-sized cities legalize these strategies, right? How do you make this work? What can they look like? We just copy what worked in the past. Sears Roebuck had amazing kit houses. Half of America had these standard cute homes. They also did missing middle, small format apartments that were kit apartments you could buy. They drop off on the rail yard and bring this in. We're partial. This one is the Atlanta. $4,500 for a 4-unit apartment building, in the 20s. But this is the Renner Brunswick. We're helping them with a whole infill. This is what the stuff looks like. It can be really cute houses, really simple with good porches. It doesn't have to be complicated. There's some duplexes mixed in. You've got some, this is literally a house, that's a house, they're separate. This is a house, this is a house. These are 1 bedrooms, that's a 2, that's a 1. That's how this stuff starts to work, right? This is another example of infill in Chattanooga, working on some really, these are studio houses right there. This is something that's almost built. This is a pilot of small format commercial, right, off the shelf, ready to go. This is how you get a little bit of that walkable amenity in neighborhoods that don't have it anymore, where it's been zoned out. Again, some stuff we've done in vertical designs, and part of what we realized, if we're going to help places like Tifton and Brunswick and Dalton and Chattanooga, we can't come in with custom designed architecture every time. Nothing works with that math ever. So we've been spending the last several years putting together a catalog, refining all the cottages we've been doing. And so we've got 250 square foot studios, we've got 8, 10, 12 plex apartment buildings. They're already designed, right? We give these as tools to Elizabeth and her team. They do beautiful site plans and other partners across the country to do this. The other component that we have to talk about, like I said, is your zoning usually doesn't work with any of this. It can cost $250,000 plus to redo your zoning ordinance. That's a lot of money. It's a really fraught process. There's a lot of tension. Nobody understands zoning, not even the planners that do it. So Elizabeth and I and a colleague from Arkansas have a separate company called Ink Codes. We have this really simple mantra. We want to educate and talk about the right way to go, but before you try to do your whole zoning ordinance, let's just do a pilot project. Let's do 1 pilot project with 1 repaired zoning ordinance and see how it turns out. It's so much easier to build trust when 1 project turns out well than this weird, scary zoning, what's going to happen in my town, what does it change, I just don't understand. Once you build trust, you build on that and work on expanding the policy, right, to other places. That's what we're doing in Brunswick, that's what we're doing in Dalton, that's what we're doing in Mont Eagle, town of 1,200 in Tennessee right now. So there's Alley, yes. But again, we look at helping to fix your Main Street districts, your residential districts. You got to fix your parking. We make that easy to do as a supplemental component. Accessory dwelling units, allowing those are critical. And people are always scared about what it's going to look like, how to regulate it. We provide, really we call them light form controls, minimum guidance. You got to have decent porch, you got to have some windows and door face the street. How do you right size that so builders will complain but they'll still be able to do the project? Not make it completely unbuildable. How do you right size that? And that is hard. It means you're going to get some ugly but not horrible, right? Some builders will just do that, but you have a chance to do well and do better. And so again, if we fix the zoning, and if locals don't know what to do, we've got to help you with that. So we have our catalogs that we work with to make it really easy to plug and play housing designs that are ready to go. So we have a few project details, and again, I want to say at the beginning, I'll say it now, that we haven't designed anything, how to design anything. We're here to talk to you about ways to think about your city, to make it better, to think about housing. But the goals that I think are really straightforward for the 6 acres next to 9 Oaks that Bruce was talking about, we want to be able to find ways to deliver attainable housing. And part of that is without using federal tax credits because they're really scarce and they're really hard. There is state monies that we've been helping other cities with to pay for infrastructure, but how do you find other monies to help reduce cost? You want quality design, right? Simple, good houses, not big, good porches, right? It needs to be that. We have to be really efficient with our infrastructure. I talked about parking, I'll talk about it again. Asphalt, wasteland, it's very expensive. That site we looked at, there's probably about 50 on-street parking spaces on the 2 streets connecting, right? If you're thinking about 70 or 50 to 80 homes that could fit on the site, and you've got 50 free parking spaces already paid for on the street, how many do you need to build off-street, right? That's the thing to think about. Think about half the people in Tifton only have 1 car, right? You need a lot of 1-bedroom homes. How many parking spaces are appropriate for this? These are things to look at the data and be thinking about. Placemaking, it needs to feel good. Your porches need to face the street. It needs to be a place you're comfortable walking by, you want to be part of and live at. Like, it needs to be a benefit, not a barriers, right? Flat out. It needs to also be a model for infill development. We got to drive around and see a ton of Tifton, but also a ton of other sites. There are a lot of other sites around. You're very land rich for infill. Whatever happens for strategy for the 6 acres, we like to look at model zoning ordinances, model housing plans, model development strategies that can be rinsed, washed, and repeated in other sites that will be of a quality thing that people understand. It's also really helpful for a builder. If you built a house once, twice, or 3 times, you understand the costs, right? You know what it's going to take to do it. If you have cost certainty, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what it's going to take to do more quality housing in your community, right? We want to help provide that certainty. Again, this is the site next to Nine Oaks, like Bruce was saying, down on Old Omega Road. Lots of great old pine trees. There is an existing kind of commercial component that needs a lot of love and attention to help bring that walkability, but this is also not that far from downtown, right? This is 5 or 6 blocks. It is a walkable journey downtown. It may not be the nicest walk, in summer in July at 2 p.m., but it is a nice walk to downtown a lot of the year. The zoning map of the area, character area, I'm not going to dwell too much. That was like 200 slides, that's it. And we are super happy for questions, and we've got an extra mic if you need, or if you guys are just ready to get going, we can talk to Bruce and everybody about getting hired to draw some plans.
Okay, that's all. Does anyone have any questions for Eric? If so, I will bring you a microphone. All right, Bruce.
Eric and Elizabeth, so I've worked in this for 35 years, and I had to really, really pay attention. But I can tell you what won me over: pictures, photographs. The old saying, they're worth 1,000 words. For our people, myself and our people, I think, to see this, I never thought you could put that many houses on a lot that size. Well, we can't. We've got some work to do. And I don't want to oversimplify, but that's the thing. I'll say this, because I spent years working this. The worst thing that ever happened to city planning was a Xerox machine. And let me tell you why. A little town in Ohio called Euclid, Ohio, and watch these two. So there was a form of zoning that came out of it that classified, it separated, and it isolated use across cities. And one town, Smithville, would make a copy of Brownville's zoning ordinance, and Greenville would make a copy of Brownville's, and you're sitting here shaking your head. This is what happened in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. That's why all suburban towns in America look exactly alike, because they copied that same Euclid zoning plan over and over. And listen to these 3 words. They classified residential, commercial, professional, industrial, and there are a whole host of in-betweens. But never the twain shall ever meet. That's why we kept spreading out for miles and miles and miles. Look at Tifton. Did you come down Carpenter Road to come here? That's an example of classification, separation, and isolation. And to be honest with you, what we're looking at here is the absolute opposite of that. Is to go back into a limited quantity of land and figure out how to integrate, how to build, and facilitate this kind of living environment that I think what we already know is this. In the 250 living units within the 12 to 15 city blocks of downtown, every time a new set of living places are built, they are rented before the paint dries. So what does that tell us as a people in a town? People want to do this. They want to live in downtown. So this is, to us perhaps it's a somewhat alien concept, but it's a workable concept. And I personally trust these people because they've worked in other communities, but they're bringing to us an idea that we have to sit down and figure out how to understand this, and will this work for us in Tifton? And he just said towards the last part of his comments, take one parcel and do a project. Do a pilot, I think is the word you used. So I just share that, is that I've been in this a long time, and I've traveled a lot around our state, and even economic development, because we were concerned with workforce affordable housing. And the only way you can get that is for a town. A town wants industry, a town wants development, but we and that town has to concentrate, where are people that work going to live? And you saw those staggering prices that he showed us. So anyway, I just share that with y'all and say, there are about 45 other people that need to be in this room tonight to begin to hear this conversation, that are integrated either in real estate, in banking, in community development, and a whole host, even in our educational system. We've all got to come together and talk about this. So I encourage y'all to go tell other people, keep your eye and ear, and I know the city has made that offer on the Short and Fog property. There's a QR code you can click on and immediately go in and become a part of the dialogue. And I'm going to end with this. So on September 17, 2017, I have a weird way of remembering, we had the first meeting to start talking about 9 Oaks. We had standing room only, people coming out of Phillipsburg, people coming out of Unionville that wanted to know, what are y'all talking about? When we first started talking about the redevelopment plan in South Tifton, and in 2018, the city adopted the urban redevelopment plan and things started moving quickly. They appointed the Urban Redevelopment Authority. And in, what year was it? It was post-COVID. It was right between 2020 and 2018. The ribbon was cut on 9 Oaks. Now, it took, what is that now, 4 years? 3 years? But nonetheless, drive through there and look at that. An incredible $13.5 million development on a site that was one of the most challenging. As I stood before council one night and told them, you have given the Urban Redevelopment Authority the most challenging piece of property in all of South Tifton to redevelop. And only through cooperative development and cooperative partnerships were we as a community able to do that. 156 people signed up to be able to get on the waiting list to rent. Are you ready? 156 people to rent 56 apartments.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through some of the examples, and I'll go back really quick, just to give you a sense of examples. You know, this is Dalton, they're about to break ground. This is Brunswick. Both these are 3-acre sites, and both about 40 to 55 units per site. These are metrics that matter, right? If you can only do a 15,000 square foot lot, that's 3 units per acre, right? That's the most housing you can provide. We're doing 12 to 13 units per acre here. Like, it's more expensive to put all those houses in, but all your costs really diminish. Your infrastructure, your sidewalks, paving, everything is massively more efficient, right? This is how you pull the cost down. You don't have a choice.
So we got another question here, Eric and Elizabeth.
Hi, Eric. Listen, before I ask the question, this is focused just on the housing piece and not the other accoutrements that may be needed to attract people to the area, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. All right, so, but I'm gonna throw it out anyway. So this is quite impressive. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed your 200 slide presentation. I think, much of it was it was necessary to kind of pull us in to, tap into the vision as you presented it. But I will say that I think people in Tifton, it's going to be an investment, and so the surrounding area also needs to be attractive enough, commensurate with that investment. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. We got to
Thank
visit, yeah, 100%. We got to visit the site today, and my advice, as we looked at it, is obviously, is it new front? Is that
Yep.
the buildings? And there's a couple, things at the intersection there, an old Greek building, there's a pool hall, and
Right.
you've got old buildings that need a lot of TLC, but commercial uses, neighborhood uses, that's where they should go at the corner in these buildings. Keep the residential development simple through a lane, keep it between the guardrails, let that be residential. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be focused on these other things. I was like, just don't try to make it commercial and residential on the same site. Commercial should be over there. How do we find partnerships with landowners, other groups in town? Because, man, getting some kind of commercial amenity is really important. It's hard, right? But it matters, and that needs to be a priority. And anything we can do to reduce the overall cost subsidy needed for the housing, it will take subsidy to try to find viable commercial users on that, because that's a lot harder to do. So we're always looking at this kind of scarcity mindset of subsidy to get the most abundance out of it. So how do we do the most with the most to make this work?
Oh, thanks. The statistics you had there were really kind of staggering, just talking about demographics and downsize, cars, all that stuff. One thing that you said though, I think it was on the slides when you were talking about infrastructure, sidewalks, electricity, trees. You said that if you do one, if you have a dense housing, you have to have the infrastructure. Or I guess if you have the infrastructure, you have to have the housing to pay for it. So how do you kind of reconcile who goes first?
Yeah, so one of the conundrums that we see in cities all over the place, particularly across the South, Northeast too, a lot of your infrastructure in these older neighborhoods were put in 70, 80, 100 years ago, right? And so there's this challenge of, well, can the sewer pipes hold it? Can the water pipes provide all? Can they make it work? We maybe should just do a little bit less and maybe not stress that infrastructure. And there's housing demand, so all this housing is kind of like a push on a balloon. It comes in this side, goes out that side. And so somebody comes in with 100 new units on the edge of town. And the city's like, well, we could spend like $25 million to extend the lines and do all this. And well, that's solved the problem. Well, you still have all that failing infrastructure in town, right? And so you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in the best of days, flat out. And so how do you figure out, one of the things, just to go into this, one of the things the governor's done that I really appreciate and like is under Department of Community Affairs, DCA, has a program called Rural Workforce Housing Infrastructure Grants. And so we've helped Dalton and Brunswick, and Thomasville's looking at it, but they've taken that big chunks of money. That helps defray a ton of your infrastructure costs because it's state money with moderate strings that comes to the city to do the infrastructure. Brunswick, because it's a city block in a denser neighborhood, they said, oh, we need to bring the water from 4 blocks away. They fixed 4 blocks of water line for the entire community under the state budget, right? Because the state's seeing regular suburban sprawl cul-de-sac development where they're putting out all this money for very limited units. They saw 50 units of housing on 3 acres and like, we'll give you the full $2 million. And they were really strategic in how they leveraged all the problems they fixed with that state money, right? If it was just a cul-de-sac extension, it would have been burned up, curb and stormwater and all the other stuff. So it's not that you don't have problems with your existing infrastructure, right? But you're gonna have to deal with it no matter what, right? And just trying to spin on the edges is not, that doesn't solve those problems, right? That will never produce enough revenue to pay for its own infrastructure out there, let alone infrastructure in these other parts of the city, right? You get the short-term revenue bump, maybe some tap fees or whatever to put the houses in, patches the budget for a year. You're losing the rest of the time. So, think in a 25-year cycle at the least.
One thought that listening to all this, gets back to is what kind of community do we want? And, I think sometimes we think of a little town that we are a completely different animal than Atlanta or Chattanooga or that type thing. But we are all people. We all want the same kind of things. I think we all deserve the opportunity for equal quality of lives. So a couple of things come to mind. Number one, is this something that our community wants? Well, I think it is. And I think it's the kind of thing that we have to talk about among ourselves about what kind of community that we want. When I first moved here, many people heard this story before, but I moved in my neighborhood right across from where Peter grew up 40 years ago. And we ran into some sort of zoning kind of issues in the area. Wanted to build McDonald's in a very inappropriate place. I went to one of our city councilmen and I said, we need some protections here. This is the center of our community. And my city council told me, well, you just bought a house in the wrong neighborhood. There are 3 desirable neighborhoods in this community. One is north of 20th, the second one is Forest Lakes, and the third one is the Country Club. And if you didn't buy a house in any of these areas, sorry, you're just dumb. And that just outraged me. What do you think about our community? I refuse to think that the only good people are people who live in gated communities. There's nothing wrong with a gated community. Like each of us who choose to view our community in a different way need to be proud of it. We need to speak it to our city leaders who are put in harsh positions to try to make this happen. Recently, I was talking to our mayor saying that they had tried earlier in some time to mandate in new developments burying of electrical and those kinds of lines, which are being done all over, you know, in other communities, and they were just destroyed. I mean, we need to demand better, but we also need to understand that there's no magic from Washington or Atlanta. We have to do it ourselves as the kind of community that we desire and really demand. So I think I appreciate this group. Ms. Bertello, what you said a minute ago, I thought it references also what I was saying, that, you know, in doing all the stuff around 9 Oaks, hopefully that is the impetus. It can't exist by itself and expect it to thrive. Anything that we do in this community and infill has to have the support of the community around it to enable it to thrive. And we all thrive together by demanding that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So I really don't have any questions, but what I want to recognize in Tifton is we don't have to go very far. So if you rode around, you notice that there's a lot of interconnectivity through the alleyways throughout Tifton, downtown. You look at a lot, you know, those are all large lots. There's potential for ADUs back there. 3rd Street, which comes right out of downtown off of Commerce Way, come the west side of downtown. There's a few properties there that we all know the property owners already, and they're willing to, you know, infill those lots, and some of those have side access with an alley. So again, that allows for porches not only from the main road frontage, but on the alleyways too. So we don't have to go very far, believe it or not. So when it comes to like pilot projects, I'm working with someone right now, and Loretta's been very helpful about a lot there off of 3rd Street, just on the west side of downtown, that we could put, you know, 4 or 5 units right there, and you have the 3rd Street side and you have the alleyway. So, yes, I know the 6.25 acre South Tifton, the short pump, those are going to be great. You know, potential for some mixed use with some retail, you know, vibrant little neighborhoods. My wife teaches at Matt Wilson, so I'm very familiar with that. I drive by 9 Oaks all day, and I mean, it's, you know, and I have to remind myself just the amount of families and kids that, you know, live there, and having to just, I mean, it's amazing to see all the activity before and after school there. But my point is we don't have to go very far. We've already got a lot of the resources here, utilities running up and down the streets, through the alleyways. You know, the One Georgia initiative, as far as that, helping offset infrastructure costs. You know, I'm talking to different people, and it's like, they're, you know, from the state level, they're looking for people to be knocking on the door to say, hey, show us your projects.
Yes. They really like our projects too, just small plug.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, and I'm all about what the community wants. Yes, there is definitely 45 more people, if not 1,000, that needs to be here, because we're talking to them in the community, and they love what we're thinking and talking about. And sometimes it just takes having to kind of like grab that person and bring them into the fold, and they're willing to do it. So again, some of that's already there. I think we just got to ask and network to the people we already talked to and bring them into the fold.
Yeah, one of the yes and what you said is, one of the things we did in Dalton was they didn't have a single zoning district that would work for what we needed to do on the site. So we helped give them a new zoning district, right? And they just used it for that site, and then the DDA came to us and said, hey, you know that zoning district you gave us? Could we use it on other sites too? And I'm like, that's why we gave it to you. That is exactly the point, right? You do we saw so many lots, like you're saying, whether it's a 1/4 acre or 2 acre, 6 acre, 12 acre, there's so many sites that could do this. And one of the things we're doing right now, we're helping colleagues across the country looking at smaller towns. We've got that 5 acre, 6 acre site. It's not just, what would we do to redevelop this? How can we break this down into 4 or 5 phases? How can you make it in clusters of 6 to 8 houses, so the infrastructure outlay for each one is not backbreaking, right? Assuming you can't get state money for every project, how can you set up this to be done by local builders that don't need to have somebody from, Macon or Atlanta come down to do the thing? And that's very much a local cost capacity, scale capacity, builder capacity. And even in towns of 2,000 to 3,000, in the middle of Arkansas, like, yeah, we got guys who can build 3 or 4 houses. That's not that big a deal. They can probably get to 6. Like, all right, well, how do we get little clusters of 6 houses at a time and be thoughtful about how maybe this guy takes down 6 over here, that guy takes down 4 over there, whatever it is. But it's that layer of thinking. And so when you talk about a quarter-acre lot with street frontage and alleys, I'm like, that's easy to break down because you can build and sell, build and sell, build and sell. You don't have to get a construction loan for $3 million to do this whole big thing. So that's how you really get that flywheel turning. And the closer it is to downtown, the easier it is to walk there, the more customers and clients you have to support all your local businesses, right? That is the core to having an amazing place. And you all downtown is doing great, right? We heard that, we saw and heard that it's doing really well. It can always do better. It will do better with more customers. That is more people that can just walk 2 blocks to go to dinner, to go to a show, to whatever it is. That's how you have an even better downtown.
Eric, Elizabeth, this is a very unique and novel development strategy for our community. You've seen our town today, you've seen our current methodology behind zoning and the way that we're laid out. We're a very classic, Bruce, what zoning town did you reference, Eureka or Euclid? Thank you. Forget my geometry. How do you steer the community at large towards accepting this and understanding this when it's such a novel idea?
Pilot and build trust. I mean, it's really that simple. Like, don't try to say, hey, you should legalize this across the whole town. Like, what the heck is that guy talking about? That'll never work here. Like, everybody finds every excuse to say no to things. We're so scared to try things in America. We don't believe that we build anything nice ever again. Like, start with a simple project, build a few nice things, build trust, build confidence. But as you do that, make sure the tools that were utilized to do that project are repeatable and reusable, right? And one of the things that we continually talk about is, from Sears Roebuck and otherwise, we've got a whole bunch of these houses that look fine anywhere in America, honestly, right? Looks great in the South, looks great in the mountain communities, love them. Actually, people up in Cape Cod, oh, these look great. I'm like, all right, whatever. I mean, it's not what we think would fit in like the Northeast, but they liked them. And so simple boxes, good porches, tools that you can reuse. We have a joke that people talk about, cookie cutter houses being horrible. Like, if you use really good ingredients, most people like cookies. I really like good cookies, right? And I went to school for architecture in New Orleans, and if you walk around New Orleans, time and again you'll see 4 houses in a row, exact same house, right? Change the paint color, change the porch rail, did a little bit with the roof, but they're great houses and great urbans. It's just stock builder plans over and over. They're just good plans with good porches, right? So we need to learn how to appreciate better cookies, right? We need to layer cookies out better in a row, face the street with porches, but that's part of it is getting good plans that could work, smaller houses down by non-oak. These are the same kind of houses that can work in other places. Now you may dial up and dial down the finishes. There's all kinds of ways you can move the needle on these houses, but it's good simple boxes, right? With good porches. That's what we need to build. And most builders don't have access. There's just not people drawing those plans. Like, you go on the internet, it can be hard to find those kinds of plans for small houses. And the civil engineers don't know how to lay the sites out. They don't have any sense of like urbanism. And so we just have lost, and architects don't know how to draw them either, right? They're like, let me draw this big swoopy thing for you that's gonna leak and cost a lot of money. We've forgotten how to do these things, right? And so it's just a matter of radical simplification, right? For how we approach it. Simpler laws, simpler buildings, better urban design. Just go back to basics of how we built our towns 100 years ago. And that's it.
Okay. Yes to everything that Eric said. Pilot is definitely what we would recommend to do first. But you all are so lucky in that you have really good leadership in the town. Like, all of you in this room showing up just to hear an hour talk in your evening in the middle of the week, like using your dedication that you all have to your town and the leadership within your town to help educate people and help get the information out there. We were talking earlier today about how amazing it was to be able to sit in a car with your mayor and your city manager and people from the URA and people from the DDA, and it's like everybody that's a decision maker is coming together and, deciding that these are things that are important for the community and that we're all gonna row in the same direction. We don't see that in Atlanta, we don't see that in a lot of places that we work, and so it's a really big benefit to y'all to have that sort of community leadership, and leaning into that and leveraging that is important. County Commissioner, sorry.
Thank you, Eric, for
Sorry, Tyler.
including my new role in that. The chairman just left, so I had to say it.
So the good thing about.
Hang on, Blake, let me bring you a microphone.
The good thing about the South Tifton development, on the South Park Avenue side, you already have access to sidewalks, utilities, right down there, you could easily, of course, let's do a conceptual layout, see how it all fits, but you're looking at potentially 20 houses just right there going down that street. Maybe more, depending on which floor plan we go with, but again, right there, that'd just be your phase one. We're not talking about having to go in and build a road, utilities through the middle. Utilize utilities out on the street. Do a phase one, do a phase two, just right there on South Park Avenue. And then I think just with the world we live in, people do like pretty pictures. They like to, putting together a conceptual site plan to demonstrate what we can build there is going to be helpful. Trying to get that buy-in for people to see visually what's going on right there. That's probably just very helpful with 9 Oaks, but I think the phasing is what's going to be important to get the buy-in from people and build the trust. But it lends itself to be phased out right there along with other places too. So
That's all we saw that front, and they're like, well, do you have any questions? Like, no, this is pretty straightforward. This is it's a great site, great frontage, plenty of pine trees, save some, others go, make great stuff, use utilities, yes. There's not nearly the hurdles that you have to overcome. The only wrinkle I'd say, I think what you said, is if you land a state grant and you get the infrastructure in for phase 2 and phase 3, it changes some of the dynamics of how you approach it, but you have the ability to do a great job there without the state money and phase it in different ways. So it's both.
A final question from me, if there are others, we'll of course address them. I'm most drawn to the Brunswick model. Brunswick, to me, of all the towns you mentioned, is most similar to Tifton, both in geographic area and in other demographics as well. Is that Brunswick project, is it all privately funded? Is it a partnership with the municipality? Is it a state-funded project? How are they funding that Brunswick neighborhood infill project?
So they set up a new community development corporation in Fort Brunswick. The head of Fort Brunswick is Lance Saba. He's also a city council member. He's awesome. They were able to buy the land. It was a former school site for not a huge chunk of money because the owner of the land was a little bit crosswise with the city on a couple other things, and so for the right sale price of the land, other things were addressed. So that made the land basis. It wasn't free land, but it was very low cost land for 3 acres. That happened. They got, I think, the $2 million from the state for that, but they also have.
And that $2 million was from infrastructure.
For infrastructure, and just technical thing for the infrastructure, the money has to flow through the municipality. It doesn't go to developer. The city can contract privately to have the infrastructure put in. They don't have to run it through Public Works, but the money flows through the city, right, in terms of that regard. And they were able to, and then go on the top half, the way they're approaching it, the top half of the site is for sale, the bottom half is for rent. They're building, the top half of the site for sale, bottom half for rent. They're building out the for sale first, help build and recoup some of the cash, but the goal is to end up with, I think, 25 or 30 rental units long term. They have rental management capacity within their organization to handle that. This isn't their only instance of that, but they're trying to build up long-term rental pool of attainable housing. That is part of the goal. So they're selling off some housing to build the ways to do that. they have a local developer, I think, Scott Bilgoff, I forget his name, who's helping them do the development. So they brought in local expertise to help do this sort of work with them. They did groundbreaking, moving got delayed a little bit. They got a really crappy appraisal on the value of the homes for sale. That created a pretty decent funding gap that Lance has had to go patch. So that was like a 3 or 4 month delay of like, all right, how do we figure out equity and make this stuff work? So it's always hard, but even when you got the lenders involved and state money, one crappy appraiser can throw a curveball at you and make it hard. But they're grinding through it and getting it done. So I think when I talked to Lance in June or July, it was more of they're grinding through it. They're trying to grind. And Dalton I think Dalton had a groundbreaking official thing in May, and they were really going to be moving dirt probably by now. So.
Dalton was set up to be an RFP.
Yeah. So Dalton, there's a joint development authority, city, county, and the downtown association had the land. They knew they didn't have capacity or ability to do the development, so we got everything done for them, tied up with a bow. Like the land's entitled, they have construction docs, they got the preliminary civil engineering for the state monies, everything's ready to go, and they put it out for RFP. So as a developer, like, you've got clarity on everything you can and need to do, right? And so they were basically vetting for what the best local partner they felt would have the best capacity to build the best thing, right? But everything was net, right? So developers, basically how much profit, ability.
At that point, developers were essentially looking at it and saying, what would my profit margin be in
Everything
this
else,
project?
yeah, they can price it out. Like we try to eliminate any uncertainty we possibly could, right? So so they picked a commercial guy. It was interesting where they were going with it, but we're excited to see how it turns out. But again, like different models, different ways, and then we were working with Thomasville with a local foundation for some land, and they realized, I think we scared them, they realized they were over their skis, they could handle 2 or 3 houses at a time, a 20-unit housing development, even the state's paying for the infrastructure, they're like, it was just too much for them, and so they kind of shut down and were trying to figure out what to do next. And so again, it's sometimes a 20, 30-unit deal, a 50-unit deal, these are things to look at. That quarter-acre site for 3 to 4 houses, all these scales are important, matter, and we've intentionally designed housing units that work really well on small lots and small frontages so they can scale across any of these things.
Any other questions for Eric or Elizabeth? Okay, with that, do you all have any final words?
Thank you for having us, and there's going to be beer.
That's what I'm told.
Okay, excellent, good.
All right, well, thank you so much. And for all of you here, thank you so much for coming. We are very grateful for your participation and for your curiosity. And I certainly am grateful for your willingness to come and learn about some of the things that we're trying to do to make this community better. So if you have any questions, come see us at URA. This is a continued joint project with the City of Tifton, with mayor, the members of council, and our downtown development authority as well. So please just ask any of us, and we'd love to talk to you about this until we are blue in the face and you are tired of listening to us. So thank you all.